You're listening to the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast, where we do fast, fun, free daily deep dives into books of the Bible. And right now, we're going through Esther.
I had a professor in college. I studied political science. That was one of the things that I went and got a degree in when I was a kid. And we had a professor named Gwen. Gwen was great. She was a lawyer. I think she's still a lawyer. And she was different than all the other professors at my liberal arts college. She jabbed the bear a lot, and she was very comfortable in her own skin and with her own knowledge and understanding of the world. And she knew she couldn't just tour de force make a bunch of 18, 19, and 20-year-olds think the right things. So the classes were very Socratic, and there's tons of debate and back and forth. And a lot of the debates were very sophomoric and super basic things that kids just haven't thought through yet. I just hadn't thought through those things. But I wanted to do these poli-sci classes with Gwen because I was a thinker. I was a politically motivated young man who saw the way the world ought to be, and I knew which team was right and which team was wrong from the devil, and I was going to go and argue for that stuff and crush the opposition. It was very much a political team player, all in on my team, like the same way I would root for the Denver Broncos. I rooted for my political team. And I didn't care about stupid stuff like the rule of law and bunch of dumb, idiotic procedural things that get in the way of doing what needs to be done. But Gwen in our classes constantly argued that there is a deteriorating phenomenon that occurs when one party gets a little bit of power and then violates a whole bunch of norms and rules and due processes of law, even tries to jump the boundaries of separation of power within a government, because eventually the shoe's on the other foot. Now the other team is in charge, and everything that Team A did to violate political norms and rules and laws when they were in charge, Team B will feel free to do, plus a little bit more, which then makes Team A even angrier when they get back in charge, and they're going to violate things even more to punish that wrongdoing. And eventually there is no rule of law, and things deteriorate into third world tin pot dictator political nonsense, prosecute your political opponents, just usual run-of-the-mill bullcrap like you see throughout the political history of everything. And at the time I remember thinking, oh, Gwen, you're so naive and simplistic, so dedicated to these archaic ideas about the rule of law. You don't understand the times we live in and how urgent it is that certain things be done. We don't have time for warrants. We know who the bad guys are. We just got to go get them. I thought thoughts like that. And she was very patient. She humored me a lot and just kept pointing back to this thing about how, no, whatever violations Party A does, Party B will not only imitate, but will increase. That was, again, probably 18 or 19 years old when all of that was going down. And eventually I turned into an adult because of the passage of time, and I assumed some things with my glands or whatever. And when I became an adult, I started to look at how the things are in the world and was like, oh, you know who had a point? Gwen. Gwen had a point. Because over the course of my lifetime, all I've seen is this cycle back and forth. It's like you've got a bed of loose soil that is barely holding together, and that is the stability on which society stands. And then you got this pendulum axe that swings back and forth, and it's like the rule of law keeps that from striking into its own foundation and cutting into that soil. But every time Party A is in charge or Party B is in charge, and some things are just too important, this isn't the time for a warrant or the rule of law, and they violate the rule of law, they violate, in our country, the Constitution, it's like they just lower that swinging axe pendulum down a little bit into that dirt, and it scrapes off the top layer. But it's still mostly there. The foundation's pretty strong. But then the other team does it a little more. Now it digs a little deeper. Then the other team's in charge. Now they do it more because these are very dangerous times. This isn't the time for the Constitution or civil liberties or human rights. The things are very, very dangerous. There's an economic, military, medical crisis. We just got to do things to people right now. And with each one of these violations, the pendulum with that swinging axe cuts deeper and deeper into the foundation on which it rests, and eventually societies fail. Well, I think we're seeing one of those shoe is on the other foot kind of situations in Esther chapter 8. And did I talk about that whole setup too long? Oh, heck yeah, I did. Also, I'm feeling things today, so it's just what you get. This stuff happens in real time. I think that's part of the fun of how we do this. You get wherever I'm at on a given day. And, well, that's where I'm at, thinking about stuff like that. And then, of course, when you're thinking about stuff like that, stuff on the page just pops. Because what really is the anatomy of what just happened here in Xerxes' court over the past few months as we get into Esther chapter 8? This guy had personal problems and gigantic crises, and he wasn't attentive to the rule of law. He gave his signet ring to somebody else, and they just started writing vile legislation in the name of the king. So all of the power of the king was in play and used by Haman, but none of the integrity that theoretically comes with that office. Remember, this is an absolute monarchy. There's no one else to check the bad impulses of government. It's the king. And maybe his wife, if she's noble in some way, would speak into his ear and help him resist those darker impulses. This kind of absolute monarchy is so dependent, its success is so dependent on the competency and the character of the king. There is no separation of powers. Everything comes to that point at the tippy top of the hierarchy. And Xerxes is portrayed in the book of Esther as completely failing in those duties. He is not demonstrating character or conviction. He is not keeping tabs on the integrity of the system of government and his empire, and he completely abdicates that responsibility lazily and flippantly. In Esther chapter 3, when Haman comes to him with his plan, he doesn't even bother to ask who the people group is that Haman intends to kill. He's just like, yeah, here's my ring, whatever, just, write your bloodthirsty edict, I got some things to do. And he walks out, and that's it. All of this could have been avoided if Xerxes, who wanted to be in the role of the guy where the buck stops, if he had done what he's supposed to do and even been attentive, even low character and attentive would have got it done here, then all of this would have been avoided. But he didn't. So the one side, the Haman side, says there is such an emergency right now. It's such a crisis. There's a people in our kingdom who should not be tolerated. That's the language that he uses. Remember, we asked nicely for them to behave well, and they didn't. Our tolerance is running out. Modern day tin pot dictators, even in my part of the world in the last few years, have said phrases like that. And so the tolerance is over, and we got to do this thing. Xerxes is like, great, go ahead and do the thing. So he just gives him the ring, and Haman does whatever he's going to do. That is a swing of the pendulum of the trustworthiness of government and the rule of law into the foundation on which it stands. The pendulum got lowered, and it took a huge chunk right there out of the credibility of the rule of law in Xerxes' court, in Xerxes' kingdom. And now that foundation is a lot more wobbly because the axe got lowered and took a chunk out of the foundation of it. Well, what's going to happen? My college poli-sci professor, Gwen, she knows the answer to this, but let's just run the rhetorical question anyway. What happens when side A, Team Haman, violates the norms of law and does something like this, and then Team B, Mordecai, Esther, and those who care about the fate of the Jews, what are they going to do when now they're in charge, when they have the gavel, when they have two of the three branches of government, when they have the power of the all-powerful extra legislative executive order that just kind of happens as a dare to ask anybody to stop them? What are they going to do as Team B in response to the actions of Team A now that they have the ring of power? Well, I'll tell you what they're going to do. The exact same thing, and maybe more. And so Xerxes negotiates against himself, as we talked about last time. Well, all right, you asked for all that stuff, and, well, because Haman attacked the Jews, I've given his estate to Esther and have now hanged him on the gallows. So there we are. Oh, boy, you don't look happy with that. It looks like you're waiting for me to say more things that I'm going to do. Well, I will not be made a fool of. I had some other things that I was going to say, and going on, just catching my breath there for a minute. Also, Now write another decree in the king's name on behalf of the Jews as seems best to you, Mordecai, and seal it with the king's signet ring, for no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked. And then it looks like he just basically leaves. And now human nature tells us that there's no chance that Mordecai is going to be like, whoa, 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 Xerxes. Here's the thing, man. The rule of law and the relationship between the people and the government's credibility is kind of like a pendulum suspended over a stable but fragile foundation of packed dirt. And hanging from that pendulum is an axe, swinging back and forth just above the foundation on which it stands. But every time we violate the rule of law, it's like we lower that pendulum and allow it to carve into the foundation on which the whole thing is predicated. I'm sorry, good king. While Esther and I appreciate the gesture, we simply cannot risk this violation to the stability and future prospects of good governance for the people of Persia. Here's the ring back. I just can't write that edict, even though I'd love to save my people. The rule of law is just too important, and hopefully, with this gesture, our political opponents who want to see us completely eradicated will match pace and no longer violate legal norms to seek our destruction. Now, of course, he's not going to do that. He's going to match whatever the last guy did, and that's exactly what he does. So it says at once, verse 9 of Esther 8, the royal secretaries were summoned on the 23rd day of the third month, the month of Sivan. They wrote out all of these orders. We'll talk about what those orders are next time around. But look, that brings us to our little land the plane moment here, a little life lesson, because we're so into that here. We do so many life lessons. What should Mordecai have done? Should he have tried to stick up for the Constitution, I say that in quotes, of the Achaemenid Empire to make sure that no further decline occurred here? Or should he use the same systems that were so fragile and corruptible for his own ends to save his people? At least here, I guess I'm on Team Mordecai. I mean, generally speaking, I'm with Professor Gwen on the idea that you don't want to violate legal norms, but here the violation isn't trifling. The violation, if it's not addressed, is going to be the end of the Jewish people. Then, so I guess if the mechanism you were offered to fix it and amend the problem is the exact same mechanism that made the problem in the first place, I suppose you use it. But I would also say this. If you're in a desperate situation and you have to use that same legally shady mechanism that was used to put you in a bad spot in the first place to get out of the bad spot, you haven't really done anything to future-proof this kind of situation from occurring again. And indeed, it's only going to be a matter of a few years later, and we're going to see similar shady uses of the quote-unquote legal system to do all the proper paperwork to punish and persecute the Jews during the reign of Xerxes' successor, Artaxerxes. So this looks like a way that is fixin' to solve an immediate crisis, but it doesn't look like this is a way to create a long-term solution within the parameters, at least, of the Persian Empire to the problem. And I'm happy to announce we're going to get a much closer look at exactly how that plays out in the reign of Xerxes' son and successor, Artaxerxes, when we go and look at the book of Nehemiah in our next series. Yep, that's going to be season 4 of this podcast. We're steeped in Persian stuff already. I mean, right now, me and probably every single one of you is more fresh, more clear, more precise on the details of the Persian age of the Old Testament than we've ever been at any other moment in our entire lives. And there's a whole bunch of story left to play out after the situation that we're dealing with in Esther finishes up. And that happens in the book of Nehemiah and a little bit more in the book of Ezra, which we'll dip into as we work through Nehemiah as well. Also, there are 3 minor prophets who were speaking during this time, and we're going to get a closer look as we work through Nehemiah next as to what they were saying and how somehow in the midst of these chaotic stories like Esther and what we see in Ezra and Nehemiah points back to the New Testament, which is where we'll go in the season after that, and the person and life and death and resurrection and reign of Christ as well. So I'm super excited about that next thing. Of course, I'm printing up books and I got some other ideas for things we're going to do for patrons, and I'll get into all of that stuff later on. This has been another long one. That's 2 in 1 week. I'll get it back under control. I promise. We're going to try to stick with the 10-ish minute Bible hour thing. Those are the ground rules. We're going to try to do it. I want this to fit into your commute. All right. I'm Matt. This is a 10-minute Bible hour podcast. Nehemiah next. So exciting. Let's do this again soon.